So that was about UBL. Some of the aspects that I talked about UBL also is the same or very, very similar to cross-industry invoice. I will try to point that out as we go along now. So CII, which is the shorthand often used, stands for cross-industry invoice. It is developed and maintained by CEFACT. CEFACT is focused on trade facilitation. It creates recommendations, which is a form of standards, but also more technical specifications and standards for e-business. It covers both commercial and government processes. I don't know all the details, of course, about it, but for example, there are agriculture and fishing procedures and reporting, which is also created within CEFACT. So it has a very, very broad coverage with many domains using the same in the same organization. CEFACT is perhaps mostly known for for people working with eInvoicing, at least the EDIFACT syntax. So CEFACT develops and maintains the EDIFACT syntax, but also then XML schemas and code list. A number of Unity recommendations that you probably are familiar with, like recommendation 20, codes of unit of measures, which are used for example, in the European standard. Actually, most of the code lists used in the semantic model, or pointed to from the semantic model, are from CEFACT, or maintained by CEFACT. The cross-industry invoice message, the first version was published in 2009. CEFACT is publishing both EDIFACT but also the XML schema packages in the same naming or same versioning approach as we've had with EDIFACT, with 96A, 96B, and 01 and it's essentially the year, and then two versions, A and B, for that year. And in some cases there was only one publication for a year, but in most cases it's both A and B. In D9B, cross-industry order, catalog, and dispatch advice were added, and new schemas and business documents have been added over the years in the context of supply chain and in the cross-industry family. Since 2016, CEFACT is publishing two branches of the cross-industry invoice schema. One which is the traditional branch, but also one which is called SCRDM, the Supply Chain Reference Data Model. It has a slightly different maintenance approach or developing approach, where it's based on a process-driven model, where with a heavy reuse of the business terms and the structures used in the document. We'll come back to that a little bit in a moment. Currently, in this release, it only contains the cross-industry invoice message. But I understand that there is work being done to also introduce the order catalog and so on into this SCRDM branch. For the architecture, it's also based on the core component specification. It's for the supply chain reference data model approach. It's using the CCBDA, which is a methodology or technology to create coherent subsets of a larger data model. So all the components within cross-industry invoice is inherited and subsetted used from superstructures, which is making the messages very alike and in that way quite easy to use. When it comes to code lists, CEFACT has both some schemas with enumerations or built-in tightly bound code lists, and some without. For the supply chain reference data model branch of the schemas, it's published with in two versions or two variants, one with coupled code list and one with uncoupled code list. So depending on how you want to validate, you may apply one set of the schemas or the other, depending on your validation approach. The traditional branch of the schemas are using coupled code lists. So for the namespaces and versioning, each document type has its unique namespace. In case of cross-industry invoice, it's only one schema for invoice and credit note, compared to UBL, which have two different schemas and two different root elements. In cross-industry invoice, it's the same, very much like it's in EDIFACT. The SCRDM branch has namespace ending with the numbers 100, and the old branch has at least the version in I think it's in D16B, has the version 13, so that is updated for each release. So it would be 14 in D16 or D70A and 15 and so on and so on. The list of syntaxes that comply with the EN has evaluated and included the SCRDM version. So the syntax bindings are towards the upper version. If you're looking at these two namespaces here, it's the first one. That is the one that has been syntax bound, and that is the one that the European public entities must support. So that is something that is very, very important when you implement cross-industry invoice, to make sure you take the correct set of schemas, because of course, since they have different namespaces, they have also different element names in many cases. You will end up with an incompatible implementation if you would take the wrong set of schemas.